Alrighty, in the previous video, I covered the physical material as well as the projectiles and that kind of stuff. So now we're going to actually move on to the attachments real quick. So I wanted to cover over the basics of the actual attachment component, and then from there, move on to the actual attachments themselves. So I kind of want to give you a rough idea of how the system works behind the scenes. So that way you can better understand kind of what's going on. So you can, I guess, kind of in theory, visualize how to use it better. So thankfully, from what I've shown other people, they seem to really grasp onto it and find it very simple and easy to use. So hopefully this should make it even easier. So let's go ahead and look at the firearm that we have, which is our example. No, I moved it up here, which is the BP M4 tutorial. So we have it. Now let's say we want to add some attachments. So what I want to add is I want to add a red dot up here. The way I would do that, I would go to add component. I would search for FPS and the FPS template part would come up. I can add that. And then from there, I want to kind of set it how I want it. So this is where it's going to depend on your actual firearm skeleton. So my skeleton hierarchy might be different from yours. So I have the initial, let me actually go ahead and view it so you can see what I mean. So I have the actual root bone, and then I have a grip bone. So that way I can attach the firearm with the root bone and then animate the firearm's position with the grip bone. So the root stays in the same exact place. So that way I can animate the right hand coming off of the firearm if I need to, for doing things like inspecting the chamber or chambering around. That way I would use the right hand to insert the bullet. So that's what that's for. So my kind of a true root bone that would be moving with the firearm is this B_grip. So whichever one your root bone is that would move with the firearm, use that. Or if you have a dedicated sight bone already, use that. So in my case, I have the B_grip, which is right here. And as you can see, it's also rotated, but we can visualize that with a mesh. So in the FPS template portion, I have the preview mesh. If we head over to static mesh, we can add one, and I'm just going to add the Reflex Sight because that's what I'm going to be using. And I can see it's rotated. So all I have to do is just simply rotate it 120 degrees, and we are now good to go. So I can just drag it down and position it roughly wherever I so want it to be and want it to aim at. So I find that right there is pretty good. I'm happy with it. So I'll just leave it. So I want to leave it there. So now how do I actually set up to spawn the part? Well, what we can do is if we want it to just be part of the customizer, which is again something that you can also create yourself to make it look better, we have possible parts. This is something you have to do for compatibility reasons. So there is a compatibility system going on behind the scenes. So if you try to add a part that does not fit, it will fail. So we go to possible parts, and we're going to add the Reflex Sight, and that allows us to add the part with the weapon customizer. Now, as you can see, we also have a default part, which I'll show you here in a second, but that name's pretty explanatory. So I go to the weapon customizer by pressing I, click here, and as you can see, here's the Reflex Sight. It now spawns it, and I can go through and aim. You don't see any reticle, but if I press O a couple times, I increase the reticle brightness so that I just have it off by default because I was doing night vision testing. And now you can see I have the reticle, and I am now aiming using the Reflex Sight. So that's literally all it takes to use the attachment system. Now another thing, the default part. Now as you can see here, when I hit play, the Reflex Sight is not there. There's nothing there. If I want it to be spawned initially, what I can do is go over to default part and just set the Reflex Sight as the default part. And then it's there automatically. I can just increase the brightness and I am good to go. So why is possible parts an array? Well, you are not limited to just one part per component. You can figure out and set up several swappable, parts. So for example, I'll add another one, and in this case, I want it to be a part component that has another part component in it. So I'm going to have a scope mount, and then that scope mount, let's view it real quick. As you can see, there's a scope already here, which is the preview mesh, but it has a part component attached to the scope mount. So this is the actual scope mount right here. Then we have our part component, which is currently having a preview mesh of the scope. So that has the options for my different scopes right here. So it's a part component and a part component. So the result of that is now I can press play. I can click it. I can go down and add the mount. I can then see another button that pops up because the mount has a part component, and add the 3 different scopes right here. Now another thing you'll notice is when I click and I try to move it around, I cannot do so. And if I try to aim, I am zoomed way too far in to the point where obviously I just can't see through the optic properly. So we need to set up some adjustability. So I want to make it so when I click on the optic, I can drag it forwards. So what we do there is we go to the part component here on the gun, and we can test it to see how far we want to move it with 2 ways. So the first way is go to the preview mesh, go to transform, and just drag the Y forwards. So that way it moves the part. So if I want it to have a max of right there, let's just say it's 12. Okay, I know that that's roughly 12 centimeters in front. So I come over here to maximum and give it the maximum transform of Y to be 12. Now I plan on changing this here in the near future to make it just a simple float to adjust that instead, because I had it in a different plane, which I'll explain here in a second. But we set that to 12, and that allows us to drag the optic forward between that range. So we can't go back any farther, and we can't go any farther forwards. So now I can add the scope mount, I can add the scope, and I can drag it forwards to the point of I am able to see properly. So here I'm using the thermal scope. Let me just switch to the normal. I think that one's the normal first focal plane. Yep. Now we have the normal scope going just all fine and dandy. So that's how you would set that up. So I noticed that was a little bit too far, so I'm going to bump that down to 10. Now the other thing is you can do that with parts inside of other parts. So for example, if I wanted this to be adjustable inside of the scope mount, you do the exact same thing. So I'll set it as its minimum point right here, and you can actually see the maximum by dragging. So if you click and drag, I know it went from like negative 1.8 all the way to a positive 1.9. So that's about a 2 roughly centimeter adjustment. So we would just plug that in, but I'm just going to go ahead and drag it over and say, okay, that's about right. So 3.6, close enough. Go to the maximum, just set that as 3.6. File and save. I add the scope mount. As you can see, it moves the part component along with it when you release. And now I can drag the scope inside as well. So now I'm right there. I can move it closer, and it gets closer to the point of it being obviously too close. So where you see the scope shadow being greatly more greatly affected. So that's how you set up all of that fun stuff. Now the same thing, it goes for every single part on the gun. If you truly wanted to, you could set this up to where you have to build out every single component. So if you really wanted to like go through, model up the stripped out lower receiver, you could add in the disconnector, the hammer, the bolt carrier group itself. You could swap out the bolt, you could add in the firing pin, you could add in the cotter retention pin, and go through, add in the fun auto sear, and everything you can go through and do. So if you want to make a gun builder out of this system, you could do so. I just hope you would be very good at working with UI, because that would be a heck of a job to do. So this component works kind of hand in hand with the customizability portion, so weapon customizers and stuff like that. So the way that those work is, let me load up the main widget here. Here's my example for it. So when it's constructed, I have the on widget constructed thing that goes on. All that's doing is just kind of disabling your input and showing your mouse. That's all. And then we call load widgets. Now load widgets, we have a canvas panel here that I actually add all the widgets to. So we clear it, just make sure it's empty. We go through, we get our firearm. from the firearm, we get all of the part components, and those are going to be this FPS part component. So we get all of those. Then we want to loop through them, and on each one we call add item. Add item just simply creates another widget which takes in that part component and the firearm and goes through and kind of constructs the compatible parts that it has. So we have the part component, we go through and we will create, let's see, where are we looping through? Create the part widget. I just got myself a little bit backwards here, because then we go through and we add the actual part. So here we get the part data, so like the image itself that you would see on display. Let's see, so this would be, I am not being this, here it is. There's the for each. I got confused here. So we create the initial part widget, which would be an empty one. So the reason for that is so when I click this empty box, it gets rid of it. That's why. So then we go through, we add that empty widget to the wrap box, which is that list of images. And then we want to go through and we want to loop through all of the possible parts that are listed in that part component. So if you remember, we have this possible parts array, we have the reflex sight and scope mount. If we were going to do that, we would have in this array the reflex sight and the scope mount. We then go through, create that part widget, and add it to the child wrap box. And that, again, that part widget, all it does is takes in the struct, which contains the image itself, and we just add that image to, well, the button for the widget. So it's a very simple system. And then for dragging and dropping stuff like that, I just handle that on ticks. So I have a function here to determine if you hit anything like the part that you're actually clicking on. So it's doing a line trace behind your mouse. We call it grab part depending on that result. And then if we release it again, or if we press it again, we have the option to release it if we're holding a part or if we are moving a part. So depending on which one. So if we are holding a part, we are then going to release it. If we are not holding a part and we click, we are then going to move that part, and so on. And once we release it, we reload the widgets again, so that way the stuff updates and it's in the correct position. Similar to that of when you rotate all this stuff around, I have it so the stuff follows and tracks with it, as you can see here. So it's a fairly simple system that you get a lot of powerful, well, parts out of it. So you are literally at liberty to do whatever you wish with it. You can build a complete firearm weapon builder game from the ground up using this. Like, you can add every single part. And that's kind of what I've done with this M4 and the Remington. So this M4 right here is literally just the upper receiver, the lower receiver, and the buffer tube. The stock, the pistol grip, the handguard, and the barrel, and the red dot, those are all added extra. I am not sure why this guy is down here or what it's doing there. I'm just going to get rid of it. But all that is built through the components. So as you can see, we have one for the handguard, barrel, so on and so on. I've just named them accordingly. And then we have the Remington 700. All this is literally the receiver and the trigger. We have the stock as a part, we have the barrel as a part, we have the Picatinny rail as a part, and we have the bolt as a part. So we have all of this built up as separate parts. If you wanted to, you could change out the sling swivels. You could change out the trigger guard, the trigger, everything. Butt pad and all that fun stuff. You can swap out every single part you really want to. So that's a rough overview of how this system goes through and works. I'm going to go ahead and leave that back in a fixed location. And yeah, there's not really much else to discuss on how you set up parts, but I will go through next and we will start discussing how the actual parts themselves function, how to set them up, and all that fun stuff. Because there's a good bit of options in there, especially when it comes down to the different magnified optics. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video.